The story of Pitcairn Island, a tiny speck in the vast South Pacific, is one of the most extraordinary tales in seafaring history. It's a saga filled with rebellion, romance, treachery, exile, and bizarre turns of fate. The events that unfolded on this remote island read more like fiction than real life. Pitcairn is part of a small cluster of islands, only 4 in total, but it was the dramatic events of the late 18th century that transformed it into a place of global fascination. Measuring just over 5 square kilometers, the island is a rugged landscape of cliffs, volcanic rock formations, and thick tropical jungle. Its climate is consistently warm, with average temperatures around +25°C all year long. Freshwater springs are plentiful, and plant life flourishes with astonishing energy. In every way, it resembles a hidden paradise. Such a lush and fertile location could not have remained uninhabited for long. As far back as the 11th century, Polynesians, most likely from Tahiti, settled there. They introduced domestic animals, established villages, and began farming. The island was rich in obsidian, a prized material used to craft tools and weapons. The islanders traded this valuable resource with nearby islands, especially Mangareva, some 500 kilometers away, and may even have paid tribute to local chiefs. This society thrived for nearly 400 years, but when the supply of obsidian dwindled and Mangareva was torn apart by civil conflict, life on Pitcairn slowly faded. By the time Europeans arrived, the island had long been deserted, yet it wasn't the ancient ruins or forgotten civilizations that brought Pitcairn lasting fame. It was a dramatic act of rebellion at sea. In the late 1700s, Britain faced a practical challenge. Plantation workers in the Caribbean needed reliable food sources, but European crops struggled to grow in the tropics. A solution came in the form of breadfruit trees, whose fruit could serve as a staple food. To carry out this mission, the ship Bounty was dispatched under the command of Captain William Bligh. His goal: sail to Tahiti, collect breadfruit saplings, and transport them to the West Indies. For many of the crew, stepping onto Tahiti was a revelation. The island was lush and inviting, populated by hospitable locals, and the women were known for their open and carefree lifestyle. Food and rum were abundant, and the sailors were welcomed with warmth and generosity. Compared to the grim streets of London, the harsh discipline of naval life, and the filth of port cities, Tahiti felt like paradise. It's little wonder then that many men resisted returning to the ship. Yet, after 24 weeks ashore, the Bounty finally set sail on April 5, 1789, carrying 115 breadfruit saplings. Just days later, however, on April 28th, a mutiny erupted in the middle of the ocean. It was led by Fletcher Christian, an officer and son of an aristocrat, not a common sailor. He was charismatic and held great influence among the crew. Tensions had been building for weeks due to Bligh's harsh leadership, frequent threats of punishment, and the crew's longing to remain in Tahiti. Christian had clashed repeatedly with Bligh, once being accused of stealing coconuts and reduced to tears by the captain's verbal abuse, according to his own accounts. He was even threatened with flogging, and like many others, he had also started a relationship with a Tahitian woman. What made the mutineers dangerous wasn't just their desperation, it was their skill. Among them were well-educated young officers from wealthy backgrounds who had joined the voyage for experience. These were men who understood navigation, charts, and seamanship. Their expertise made the rebellion successful. After seizing control, Captain Bligh, along with those loyal to him, was cast adrift in a small boat and left to face the open sea. The rebels, meanwhile, turned the Bounty back toward Tahiti, but freedom was fleeting. The mutineers knew British authorities would come looking for them, desperate to escape detection. They sought refuge in one of the most remote places on Earth, Pitcairn Island, back in Tahiti. They gathered supplies and recruited several Tahitian men and 6 women to join them. With this mixed group aboard, Christian led the Bounty to the uncharted isle. There, on Pitcairn, a new chapter of human history began, one of the strangest and bloodiest stories of survival and isolati ever recorded. Meanwhile, aboard the small open launch left adrift in the vast ocean, Captain William Bligh and those who remained loyal to him were fighting for survival. The tiny vessel was tossed by waves nearly 56 kilometers from the nearest landmass, Alpha. In search of food and fresh water, Bligh made the calculated decision to sail toward the island. But their reception on Toffa was far from welcoming. The encounter turned violent, costing the life of one crew member. Bligh and the survivors narrowly escaped the hostile encounter and hastily left the island behind. As an expert navigator, Bligh quickly reasserted control over the dire situation. For nearly 2 months, he skillfully piloted the fragile boat across the sea, enduring extreme conditions while maintaining order among the men. Of the 18 souls on board, only one died, an astonishing success under the circumstances. Eventually, they were spotted at sea and rescued, eventually returning to England. Bligh reported all that had transpired, yet fortune rarely seemed to favor him. His name would later be tied to another infamous episode, the Rum Rebellion in Australia. That story, however, belongs elsewhere. Upon learning of the Bounty mutiny, British authorities swiftly launched a punitive mission. A Royal Navy warship, the Pandora, was sent to the Pacific with orders to locate and arrest the rebels. The operation saw partial success. On March 23, 1791, 14 members of the Bounty's crew were arrested on Tahiti, but were eventually acquitted, while the rest faced death sentences. At the last moment, two received royal pardons, one of them being Peter Heywood, a young officer who played a role in the mutiny. Influential family connections helped save his life. He would later become a naval captain and author one of the most comprehensive Tahitian language dictionaries. Still, the primary objective, the Bounty itself, remained elusive. According to locals, the fugitives had fled Tahiti with livestock such as pigs, goats, chickens, and cows, along with plant cuttings. On board were 9 Europeans, 6 Tahitians in effective servitude, and 12 Tahitian women, knowing full well that returning to Britain would mean execution. The group chose to vanish entirely from the world. Their chosen refuge was Pitcairn Island, a remote and recently discovered piece of land, barely known on maps. A ship's log entry by Captain Philip Carter recounts the first sighting of the island. "We sighted land north of our course. As we drew closer the following day, it rose out of the ocean like a towering cliff. Since this discovery was made by a young gentleman, the son of Major Pitcairn of the Marine Corps, we named it after him, Pitcairn Island, due to the island's dangerous reefs and powerful waves. Landing proved extremely difficult. Its isolated location, poorly marked on nautical charts and far from major trade routes, made it nearly unreachable by military vessels. With its abundant freshwater, fertile soil, and tropical climate, it was an ideal place to disappear. Here, the mutineers began what they hoped would be a new beginning. At first glance, Pitcairn truly appeared like paradise. The settlers found wild fruits and successfully cultivated crops such as potatoes and yams brought from Tahiti. They built homes and divided the land into plots. But tensions emerged early. The European men carved up the island into 9 parcels, leaving nothing for the Tahitians. Gradually, bitterness grew among the local men. It seemed that the sailors had promised the Tahitians they would be treated as equals in their new community, but once they reached Pitcairn, those promises vanished. The Tahitians were reduced to a state resembling slavery. Their women were taken from them. They were forced into labor, and not even a small plot of land was given to them. To make matters worse, one of the former crew members, McCoy, discovered how to distill alcohol using local plants. Drinking quickly became a daily habit, further fueling the tensions already simmering within the group. A major turning point came during the first year on the island when the wives of 2 Europeans, John Williams and John Adams, died. The men then took to Tahitian women for themselves, women who had previously been regarded as their spouses. This act was devastating for the Tahitian men, leaving only one woman among them. Naturally, this injustice sparked outrage. A secret plan was made under the cover of night. The Tahitian men would strike back and attempt to reclaim their freedom. However, the plot was betrayed. Some of the women informed the Europeans. In the aftermath, 2 of the 6 Tahitians were killed, and the remaining 4 were once again placed under the control of the Europeans. By September 1793, the island's first children had been born. Of the 4 Tahitian men left, only one woman remained nearby. Her name, according to some sources, was Moreve. With each passing day, the Europeans grew more hostile toward the Tahitians. On October 3, 1793, the Tahitian men finally rebelled. John Williams was the first to die. Soon after, Fletcher Christian, John Mills, Isaac Martin, and William Brown were also killed. One of the mutineers, John Adams, was wounded but managed to escape into the jungle with 3 others. From that moment onward, chaos took over. The Tahitians had little chance of survival. Just like the Europeans, some historical accounts even claim that Tahitian women turned against their own men, acting with greater cruelty than the foreigners. But in reality, it was not betrayal, it was war. It was a brutal conflict over land and women. Meanwhile, the 4 surviving Europeans hiding in the forest refused to remain passive and began taking action of their own. In the end, 2 Emu were killed by a Tahitian named Monari, following a dispute over a woman. Monari himself was later shot dead by McCoy. One of the women, possibly Tevrua, killed the Tahitian man Tuteta. The last to die was Neo, who was executed by Edward Young. After these events, the Europeans regained full control of the island. None of the Polynesians lived to have descendants. Only 4 European men remained: Edward Young, Matthew Quintal, John Adams, and William McCoy, along with 10 women and several mixed-heritage children. The years that followed were relatively calm aside from one growing problem: alcohol. McCoy continued refining his homemade brew, and soon the entire group was consumed by drunkenness and madness. In a tragic episode in 1799, one man, delusional from withdrawal, tied a stone around his neck and leapt from a cliff into the sea. Later, a drunken Quintal attacked his companions and was killed by Young and Adams. A year later, Young died from complications of asthma, leaving only one adult European alive: John Adams. Overcome with grief and guilt, Adams fell into deep depression and drank even more heavily. During a violent episode of delirium tremens, he experienced vivid hallucinations that led to what he described as a spiritual awakening. The very next morning, he destroyed the still and declared to the women and children that life on the island would now strictly follow the teachings of the Bible. No one objected. In truth, the survival of the colony depended entirely on the women. The men, meanwhile, spent most of their time drinking, fighting, and killing one another. The women preserved their ancestral knowledge. Meals were prepared in traditional stone ovens. Yams, taro, bananas, and coconuts were regularly cooked. And occasionally there was goat or pig meat on the table. At first, clothing was made from sailcloth, but over time it was replaced by skirts and loincloths woven from stofa, a traditional Polynesian fabric made from the bark of the paper mulberry tree. The climate was warm, food was abundant, but the internal atmosphere of the community remained highly volatile. For many years, the islanders lived completely cut off from the outside world. Only once, around 1797, while several of the men were still alive, someone spotted a ship far out at sea. Not long after, a second vessel appeared. Sailors landed to collect coconuts, but the islanders fled into the jungle in time, and the visitors never realized the island was inhabited. The following decade passed more peacefully. Adams, who had unexpectedly found faith, tried to build a model Christian society. He gave sermons, taught the children to read and write, and worked to bring order to the tiny settlement. Over time, he became the father of many children, hence why nearly all current islanders are his direct descendants. In 1808, almost 20 years after the mutineers arrived, Pitcairn Island was accidentally rediscovered by the American whaling ship Topaz. Captain Mayhew Full sent word back to London, and the story of Pitcairn Island slowly began to escape the pages of maritime logs and enter the wider world. At the dawn of the 19th century, England had little concern for the fate of a tiny speck in the vast Pacific Ocean. The nation was deeply embroiled in the Napoleonic Wars, and a remote tropical island seemed irrelevant to anyone with power or influence. It wasn't until several years later, on September 17, 1814, that Pitcairn Island re-emerged into the public eye. Two ships, one British HMS Blossom and one American, happened to be sailing nearby. By sheer coincidence, they chose to stop at Pitcairn and were astonished to find it inhabited. When the sailors set foot on land, they encountered something extraordinary: a community living by its own rules. strange yet functioning harmoniously. Some described it as a lost Eden. Untouched by modern corruption, the discovery made its way back to London and unexpectedly sparked fascination. In an age where moral decline was widely debated and many believed the past held higher values than the present, the idea of a pure, untouched society struck a chord. People longed for a symbol of authentic faith, simplicity, and order, and Pitcairn appeared to fit the role perfectly. Thus ended nearly 25 years of complete isolation. From that point on, more and more ships began to visit the island, arriving from Australia, India, South America, and Britain itself. Each vessel brought supplies and gifts, trading tools and goods for fresh produce and hospitality. New crops like oranges were introduced. Stone houses gradually replaced wooden huts. Clothing styles became westernized, and daily life took on a more structured rhythm. On March 5, 1829, John Adams, the last surviving member of the original Bounty mutineers, died at about the age of 65. At the time, the island's population had grown to 66 people. He was remembered not only as a leader but as the symbolic heart of the island. After his death, leadership fell to George Mounts, a former soldier and adventurer who had fought in Chile. He quickly asserted control and became the island's dominant figure. However, in 1832, a mysterious man named Joshua Hill arrived, claiming to be an official governor appointed by the British Crown. In truth, he was nothing more than a con artist. Somehow, he managed to seize authority, expel nobs, and exile those loyal to him. Hill ruled with cruelty and paranoia. He imprisoned people for minor offenses, issued authoritarian decrees, and demanded unwavering respect and obedience. Fear returned to the island. It wasn't until 1838 that the impostor was finally driven out. With his departure came a rare period of peace. The population grew beyond 100, the island adopted its own constitution, and trade flourished, exporting meat, fruits, and vegetables to passing ships. Soon, over 200 people called Pitcairn home, all of them direct descendants of the original Bounty mutineers and their Tahitian partners. 1882, a law was passed banning foreigners from settling on the island. Though slightly relaxed over time, this restriction remains part of the island's identity today, with most residents still being direct descendants of the original settlers. For a time, it seemed life was improving, but history had another twist in store. In 1886, a preacher named John Tay arrived, representing the Seventh-day Adventist Church. His message resonated deeply with the islanders. They abandoned pork, changed their religious customs, and fully embraced the new faith. Some historians believe Tay exaggerated the truth, suggesting that all of England had already converted to Adventism, a claim far from reality. Still, his words carried weight with the islanders, and Adventism remains the dominant religion on Pitcairn to this day. The island retained its sense of mystery and separation until 1914, when it was incorporated into a major tourist route. With the opening of the Scandinavian shipping canal, cruise ships began including Pitcairn in their itineraries. Many islanders left for neighboring territories or mainland Australia. The centuries-long isolation was finally over. It seemed Pitcairn's story had become part of history, but not quite. By 2004, the island's population had dwindled to just 47 people. Though numbers once reached as high as 300, most had emigrated. Then came a shocking development. In 2004, 7 islanders, including the mayor, Steve Christian, a descendant of Fletcher Christian, were convicted of serious crimes, notably involving sexual relations with minors. One might think that was the end of the turmoil. Yet in 2010, a new criminal investigation targeted the newly elected mayor. On an island of only 47 people, 8 individuals now carry convictions for severe offenses. Today, Pitcairn survives largely through tourism, but its small population is still made up almost entirely of the descendants of those rebellious sailors and Tahitian women. Generations of genetic isolation, tight family bonds, and cultural seclusion continue to shape life there. If you found this tale unusual, well, so did I. Share it with those who love extraordinary stories and real-life maritime legends. Don't forget to hit like if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to stay updated on more journeys into hidden histories, strange places, and unforgettable characters.